Chapter 13 Visions. Love spiritualized by death. The nurse looked upon the table and at me with interrogatory disapproval, which I feigned not to see, closing my eyes to avoid her questioning when she picked up the fern and crushed roses from the floor where I had tossed them. I shrank from the sound of a human voice. In fact, any sound was almost painful to me. I was in such a sensitive, spiritualized condition, feeling more than ever a creature of another world. The day was well into the afternoon before this supersensitiveness gave way to normality, and I went into the bath almost free from it. While I bathed, a voice came speaking hurriedly, as though explaining something. "What are you saying?" I asked, listening more intently. Then followed an explanation concerning the construction of an electrical appliance for heating water and heating rooms generally, to which I replied, "You must know that I understand little of the practical application of electricity."
But why not learn it? The knowledge of its real value is in its infancy.
"I may, someday," I replied almost indifferently, without realizing that my indifference was an offense to one so deeply in earnest, and felt a tinge of self-condemnation when a moment later a retreating voice wafted back with reproach in its tone.
Oh, if people only understood what they call electricity, the possibilities of it.
I wish that I had listened more discriminatingly, as by my indifference, I doubtless forfeited a truth which otherwise might have been given me. All afternoon I could not forget it and kept wondering to what extent things exist in the invisible world before they are manifested, in this and such kindred conjectures. Possibly the recognition of this point, that things do exist in the other world before they do in this, was the object sought, who knows? When night came I was glad, as I was weak and weary almost to unconsciousness, and invited sleep with something of a longing for it. But it did not come. Instead, I lay wide awake thinking in a listless, undefined way, with my consciousness close to the invisible world, counting every stroke of the clock as it chimed out on the soft stillness of the night, which held my soul en rapport with its mood. When 12 struck, I remember there was a pleasing sensation that when it struck again its sound would be reduced to the minimum. Distraite, with eyes wide open, staring into the semi-darkness, I could sense a change coming over the room and discern a slowly gathering mist, which became so pronounced that it obscured the walls and objects in the room. Then it began growing in scope until it became boundless in expanse, lights and colors mingling and intermingling in it. That it took on the look of the sea, as though it were, in fact, water, showing the inhabitants of the sea, those under the crust of her roof and those above it, exercising a potent, invisible power which will not always remain beyond the range of our conception. There were ships that traveled with even more fleetness and sureness of purpose, under the crust of her roof, than those above it. A terrible blackness, as of a storm, yet not a storm, was upon the sea, destroying the ships that rode upon her waves without injury to those that plied beneath them. Then there was a calm sea with ships passing down beneath the waves easily and unperturbed. Others, differently made, passed serenely, high above the sea in the air, and there was something ominous about it. Then a change came over the scene, and when the white mist showed again there was a darkness within it, which I perceived represented land with its cities, rivers, lakes, trees, and flowers. There were the inhabitants, those on the earth and those in the air about and above it, in appearance so like that it was difficult to distinguish one kind from the other except for the positions maintained. Then came soldiers of all nations in full uniform and war equipment, flags flying, marching, ever marching toward an elusive goal which was labeled a peace, and like a will-o'-the-wisp it moved ever before them as they grimly pursued it with the attitude of, "We will have peace if we have to fight for it," and while a peace was yet afar off, they marched with the sound as though they waded in mud, but it was not mud, it was blood, they were wading in it, splashing it over everything. I turned away to shut out the horrible sight and sound, and when I looked again, but I will not attempt to describe the desolation of the readjustment. I turned from it and its long drawn-out agony, and had not the courage to look back for some time. When I did, a change was over everything, the whole world seemed transformed in every way. A wonderful event had come and unity was established among the people who were rejoicing exceedingly. Suddenly the water mists and the land mists formed themselves into a gigantic map of the world, and the people, as one great family, were within it, while on the line of the circumference the word peace came out in large, illuminated letters, which moved like living things around the map and then formed themselves across the diameter, embracing the whole world. Slowly the scene began fading, the map going first, then the people, then the letters one by one. As my tired eyes were riveted upon them in the darkness, over and about was a halo, dim but discernible, which manifested itself in a scintillating way. Then the scene slowly gave way and I was looking at the familiar paper on the wall, and the picture just as naturally as though there had been no intrusion of that which was non-existent. There was a sense of relief when I looked out of the window and saw the reflection of the street lamp and listened to the street noises, trying to shake off the becoming shadows of something terrible that was nagging my consciousness into apprehensiveness. This, however, was not the only occasion on which such phenomena presented themselves, but they came only when I was too weak and ill to care whether they came or not. I have tried to call up something of the kind at will, but so far have never succeeded. Of course, they are only visions and may or may not have a meaning, but strange as it may seem, from the very beginning of these manifestations I have resented the vision phase of it. Even now it almost irritates me to write about them. I have in mind an especially irritating incident. One afternoon flags of the different nations waved, going up and coming down, changing positions uninterruptedly for hours as plainly as though they really existed and had some meaning in their activity. This persisted until I felt as though I could fight every country that ever had a flag, so tired of them did I become. Scenery, lakes, seas, flowers, trees, beauteous creatures, have come and gone, ever changing, in the meshes of the mist. Veritable dream pictures of loveliness, to which I did not especially object, although I did not encourage them. Be that as it may, that which I saw I wanted to have at least a semblance of existence, a pretension anyway. The next morning after the first attack of visions, I was thoroughly displeased with myself, and felt more strongly than ever the advisability of tearing myself away from the domination of this tyrannical mystery, which had held me for days, if not entirely against my will, certainly against my judgment. I was determined to end it all by getting out of bed that very day. The irony of such a determination when one is almost too weak to lift one's hands. But something had to be done. Just to think I had at one sitting seen what seemed like the world as a giant battlefield, in all its bloody horrors, then a valley of desolation, in the tragedy of readjustment, all of which was finally swallowed up by the victory of unity, of universal peace, a kind of paradise on earth. It impressed me more than I would care to admit even now. The temptation to interpret it was ever recurring to me, and it seemed that I could foresee awful things. Then I would try to persuade myself that it had no meaning, and when it persisted I could only take consolation in feeling that time is the old justice that examines all offenders, and time would tell. While I grappled with the vision problem, a telephone message came announcing the arrival in the city of a little nephew, whom I welcomed as a needed diversion. He was the child of my younger brother, whose wife had died a short time before. While I was very fond of the mother, I had never seen the child, who was then about 2 years old. While I appreciated the courtesy, I was somewhat surprised to have the wife's parents bring the child to visit me, as I had never met either of them. A few minutes later they were ushered in, and introductions over, the grandfather placed the child on the bed beside me, saying,
"And this is your brother's boy."
He was a pretty, intellectual child, with golden curls and large, expressive brown eyes that looked questioningly into mine. I put my arms about him without any intention of kissing him, but suddenly I felt an intense desire to do so and asked him if he was not going to kiss me. He seemed not quite sure about it, but after a moment's deliberation, bent his little curly head and touched my mouth with his rosebud lips. I released him so his grandfather might take him if he so desired, fearing he might fall if not restrained by more force than was mine to exercise. I was astonished to hear quite plainly a voice cry out,
"Oh, Fanny, hold him again, I want to kiss him."
And there, standing beside the bed, in broad daylight, leaning lovingly over her baby, was its little mother, just as lifelike as I had ever seen her. Again I folded the child within my arms, and as I did so I could distinctly feel her arms about mine and hear her faint love-laden whisper,
"Oh, my baby, my little boy."
Pulling his face down to mine I again kissed it, but this time I felt distinctly a cold obstruction between the child's lips and mine, as its mother's invisible arms about mine held it tightly clasped to my breast. At that moment I felt what a sacred, holy thing a mother's love is. It passed through my entire being and held me glorified, uplifted, the purest passion that ever flooded my soul. Suddenly the pressure lifted, leaving me almost unconscious with weakness. The divine spark of motherhood, with its illuminating joy, which had been loaned me for that brief instant, had gone, possibly never to return. Yet, I feel that I shall always know what a love of a mother is like, a mother's love spiritualized by death, a deathless love. When released, the child sat looking at me in a puzzled way. Who can say, child though he was, that his mother's love did not touch his consciousness? His grandfather came and stood by the bedside, unconsciously falling under the influence of his dead child who stood so near him. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Looking at the child and then at me, he said with a tremor in his voice.
So like her.
Yes, I echoed, so like her. After removing the child, he looked at me and said with solicitude.
How tired and ill you look. I hope the boy has not overtaxed your strength.
Not in the least, I assured him, in a mumbling sort of way, as talking was rather difficult for my lips had a sense of deadness caused by conveying a kiss over the span that divides life and death. Therefore, I closed my eyes to avoid further conversation until I was equal to it. A gentle voice which I remembered so well, came like a caress.
Thank you, dear. It was for this I had them bring him. I wish I could thank them, too.
I will do it for you, I promised. Thank you, came the voice so weak that it was scarcely audible, but she did not go away. Instead, she remained in the room the greater part of the day near her baby. I could feel her presence and on several occasions caught the faintest glimpses of her, but she did not again converse with me, nor did she materialize. Subconsciously these dear old folks had acted in accordance with a request from the world invisible, by making a journey to take a baby to a sick aunt who had never seen him, that his dead mother might avail herself of the occasion to hold her baby in her arms and kiss him, while the divine current of her love flowed like a benediction over his little body. There is no death. The stars go down to rise on some fairer shore, and bright in heaven's jeweled crown they shine for evermore, and ever near us, though unseen, the dear, immortal spirits tread. For all the boundless universe is life, there is no dead. How I wanted to tell this dear old couple that the child they mourned as dead stood beside them radiantly happy, bathing them doubly in her purified love because of their tender care of her child. Chapter 14, Back Across the Dark Span. The psychology of a love so beautiful remained with and haunted me far into the night. As I lay looking listlessly out of the window on the moonlight, just a waking dreaminess wrapped in careless, contented indifference, which a peaceful joyousness sometimes imparts. It was nearing midnight before I drifted into a sleep, from which I was rudely awakened by a loud knocking, which became ever louder and more pronounced. I sat up quickly, staring inquiringly in the direction from whence it came. As the noise came from the direction parallel to my head, I was obliged to turn around, as well as to sit up in order to see what it was. So numerous had been my surprises during the previous weeks, that I had come to regard myself as being immune from surprise, and I now realized that I had grievously erred in this, as I started in surprise and horror at the very last thing that one would ever expect to see coming back across the dark span. Moving serenely up and down, using a large white pedestal on which was a life-size statue of Sappho as a background for its manipulations, was a crutch. It continued to move up and down methodically, becoming plainer and plainer, until the hand manipulating it could be seen distinctly, a hand so characteristic as to be recognizable among thousands, that of my father. A crutch had made his life on earth a long, sad requiem, and there before me was the evidence that it had pursued him even into eternity. My fondness for my father made the contemplation of this thing a horror beyond expression. With heart beating wildly, my eyes riveted on it, in anguish I cried out. "Oh, Papa, is it you, really you?"
"Yes, child, it is I,"
came the placid answer, as the crutch disappeared and I perceived him coming nearer, and asked in an odd whisper. "Are you crippled in that life, too?"
"Why no, I am a veritable giant of strength and vigor,"
he replied easily, as he took my arm with a grip that verified his assertion. "But why did you bring that hateful thing?"
"That you might know it is I?"
"I should have known anyway."
"Possibly. But do not believe all that you see and hear from this side. There are many deceivers."
"Deceivers?" I echoed in alarm.
"Yes, unhappy creatures near the earth, who, to attract and maintain the attention and consideration of those with whom they can communicate, make the most preposterous representations."
"How shocking, but how is one to guard against them?"
"One soon learns to discriminate. Like attracts like, and by keeping your spirit pure only the highest can come into spirit communion with you.
So intense had been my interest as I listened that I did not realize that I was still sitting in a cramped position, with my feet crossed under me. He seemed pleased and said,
You used to sit that way nearly all the time when you were a little girl.
and helped to smooth out the pillow as I lay back on it in joyous readiness for a tête-à-tête with the idol of my childhood, coaxing eagerly. Now, Papa, dear, tell me everything, how you came and all about it.
Coming was easy enough, but to get you to hear and understand was quite a different matter. Often I have come to you, called and caressed you, but when you heeded me not, I would go away sorrowing deeply that my little girl refused to turn her face to the light.
I am glad I can see you now, glad to know you still live and love me.
There is no death, it is all a beautiful birth, as the people of earth will soon recognize.
Tell me all about it, I said with finality, expecting to have the whole story in a nutshell, all the mysteries solved at once.
The earth life well lived is one of the most important phases of existence and means much in those that are yet to come.
Are there more than one? I asked in astonishment.
It is well that one is not all.
How many are there?
I have yet to learn. You know I came here bound by the traditional beliefs and have been about as busy unlearning as I have learning.
Are things so different?
Insofar as everlasting punishment and a localized hell and heaven are concerned, yes. But we must not discuss such things. Let's talk about children, as I have not long to remain.
Very well, Papa, I assented, trying to suppress my disappointment that he had so abruptly changed the subject most interesting to me. After speaking with loving solicitude of each of his children, calling them by name, he turned away saying,
I must go now.
No, not so soon, I protested. There are many things I want you to explain to me.
Create today thy life for tomorrow. I must go, as there are requirements in this existence just as there are in the earth life.
When I realized that he was really going, I called after him, Oh, Papa, tell me, am I going to die?
There is much you will be given to know. Be patient, very patient. Goodbye.
But, Papa, you did not tell me, am I going to die? I called after him in the darkness, but no answering voice came and I knew for a certainty he had gone. I sat up in bed again and looked around where I had seen the crutch, half afraid that I wouldn't see it again, but there was nothing that even suggested the supernatural except a chillness, which caused me to shiver slightly and put the sheet up over me as I lay down again. On the following evening, when my fiancé came, I wanted so much to tell him of the scene with the baby the day before, and the crutch of the previous night, but when I realized that I must not, my heart ached at the rift in the lute. This secretiveness on my part was causing in the perfect harmony of our love, just a little minor discord, but it was ever there. While frankness may be dangerous waters for the sailing of ships of state, the same can be said of the lack of it in the paddling of Cupid's canoe. After he had read aloud to me for some time, I felt less the oppression of my enforced lack of candor, and enjoyed listening to a story of life instead of death, such as I had listened to for many weeks. After the story was concluded, on my natural impulse of frankness, I did a very foolish thing. I attempted to tell him about the crutch that I had seen manipulating beside the white pedestal. The nurse looked shocked and he looked at me in undisguised disapproval and disappointment, saying,
And I was congratulating myself that you were better.
I am all right, sir, I assured him, but this was too much for his toleration. He left the house thoroughly discouraged and no doubt disgusted, while I lay dampening the pillow with the tears I could not restrain, listening to his footsteps as he went down the stairs. I next heard the gate latch click and knew he was gone. The next day, to my utter bereavement, every statue, pedestal, and almost every movable thing was taken out of the room, leaving it not only without a background for ghostly manipulations, but so desolate in appearance that these words kept running ceaselessly through my brain. Bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Chapter 15 Writing. When the nurse told me the doctor considered the room more sanitary, when less crowded, I made no comment, but simply turned my head to the foot of the bed, so my eyes would not continually rest upon the devastation of what I considered the most beautiful room in the world, at a time when I needed its beauty most. Another dagger tipped with the poison of mistaken kindness. As the afternoon wore on, I became more and more restless and dissatisfied, and had to battle with myself to keep from being really angry at such presumption, but a promise of faithfulness, embraced self-control, and I strove to be equal to the test put upon it. Nor was it as easy as it sounds. I resolutely shut out the voices of the invisibles, and looked out with my thoughts on the gathering storm. The black clouds, the lightning flashes and the thunder, made me wish the wind would blow and the rain would come down in torrents, to harmonize with my mood, to say nothing of dispelling the sultriness of the atmosphere. After some time of this depression, I felt that I must do something, anything, to counteract it. With this end in view, I asked the nurse to bring me writing materials, and when she did so, and made me comfortable by extra pillows, I began writing letters. Before proceeding very far, I perceived that my pencil did not respond to my mental direction with the usual swiftness and accuracy, but I charged it to my weakness and tried to continue. The pencil was lifted from the paper in the middle of a word, and almost removed from my hand. I began again, but it was pulled at, touched, shaken and lifted with such persistence, that at last I gave up writing as the letters were not of such importance, that they had to be executed under such stress. Thus arguing I lay back disgusted, with the pencil relaxed between my fingers. No sooner had I done so than a numbness, as of something coming down into my arm and permeating it, was distinctly felt, rendering the arm and hand utterly useless. This I regarded very seriously, as fear of paralysis was upon me, but thoroughly alarmed as I was, there was something that pressed against removing the hand from the position in which it was, and I could only regard it apprehensively. Then I saw the hand vibrating and the pencil, independent of my direction, assume a writing position and, propelled by a force and guided by an intelligence outside of my own, began writing, yes, writing with my own hand, yet I did not know what it was until I read it. How wonderful it seemed, and still the wonder grew, when I discovered some of the writing was in a language I did not understand. Then the rain came down torrentially, lightning flashed, thunder rolled and the wind blew wildly, but heeding them not I wrote on, enchanted by this weird and marvelous manifestation. Held in bondage, by an intelligence that was dominating its every movement independently, my hand gave some wonderful demonstrations of what could be accomplished in this way. There were communications from friends and loved ones, predictions, a world's war amongst them, thoughts, poems, etc. I here reproduce one of the poems which was given that afternoon, wherein the soul and body are treated as two separate entities, defining their relationship, as it were. The castle me. I dwell in the castle me, where I would reign alone. But good and evil are here. Beside me on the throne. I gaze out of its windows. See it lashed by life's sea. While I grow ever stronger. Within the castle me. But someday I'll go away. And leave it here below. For I'll no longer need it. In the realms where I go. Earth will take it back again. And dust with dust remold. Just as though it had never harbored a human soul. While I go on my journey. Unto regions of light. Where there'll be no sorrowing. And there will come no night. Now reread it as I did, and the fullness of its meaning will come upon you, bringing a sense of soul, independence of the body, a recognition of the ego, as a thing apart from the body and yet manifesting within it. This wonderful ability to write, to pass my hand into the realm of the invisible and bring back, oft-times strange and startling records, still remains with me, but I rarely exercise it. What is the use? Even as I write this book, I constantly combat efforts of invisible intelligences to control my pen, and incorporate their views in the writing thereof, but, as it is a record of my personal experiences, I am recording it incident by incident, just as it came to me, regardless of how it may sound or seem, therefore, I repel such interferences. Using the pencil was not the only phase of this independent writing that manifested itself through me. On numerous occasions, invisible hands have taken mine and, with my index finger, written on walls, doors, portieres, bed or anything convenient, even on my lap. Where there was no visible result, each word was spelled out slowly, letter by letter, as my mind accepted and retained it. If, for any reason, a letter was obscure, or I failed to grasp it, it was immediately rewritten, until correctly conveyed. At first all writings were accomplished by pronounced vibrations of the hand, but gradually this ceased and the hand appeared practically normal. While admitting this form of writing to be one of the most wonderful phases of my psychological experiences, I strongly advise against indulging in it indiscriminately, or in the spirit of levity. When the hand is passed into the beyond, it is generally taken by any presence that happens to be near, and if levity attracts irresponsible beings, in accordance with the law of like attracts like, the result is as often misleading as otherwise. There are entities in the world of shadows who do not hesitate to give the most astounding untruths, just as there are on earth. This I have proved to my own satisfaction, and hence this is a subject that should be approached only when one is mentally and spiritually en rapport with the highest influences, bathed in purity of purpose, and strength of soul more powerful than adverse influences can possibly be, always remembering, where good rules, evil is powerless. Unless we have some affinity for evil, it cannot touch us, therefore, when any experiment is undertaken with our thoughts, in the right key, we lessen the chances of forming undesirable invisible acquaintances, which are really of more importance than visibles. Our thoughts should be carefully trained in the right channel, before attempting any experiments at all, and then only with careful discrimination. You can never tell what your thought will do in bringing you hate or love. For thoughts are things, and their airy wings are swifter than carrier dove. They follow the law of the universe. Each thing must create its kind, and they speed o'er the track to bring you back whatever went out from your mind. That thoughts are things cannot be overlooked in the study of psychology. One might say, it is the keynote. It is by thought we converse with the soul world. Our thoughts in the spirit world are very much what our personal appearance is in the earth life, only more so. Our invisible associates are very much what our inner thoughts are, as that is what attracts them. All that stormy afternoon was consumed in watching my benumbed hand and arm, serving accurately and swiftly an intelligence other than mine, and looking at the result with as much surprise and wonderment, as if executed by the hand of another. When the sun was set and the evening shadows came into the room, the nurse suggested that I must be very tired, and insisted on putting the writing material away and sending the letters to be mailed, to which I replied, they are unfinished, and carefully folded what I had written, and put it in an envelope, placed it in the box and handed it to her to put on my desk, which she did without comment. Then the night came on, dark with continuous rain and a distinct coolness in the atmosphere, but there was no sleep as it was Tuesday night, and I could not tear myself away from the watching and waiting it fastened upon me. How weary I felt of waiting, weary of life, even weary of the promise of death. All night long my consciousness was open to the silence. I called into it, but no answering voice came. The only form of communication was a mingling mass of letters, which arranged and rearranged themselves in a meaningless way before my eyes, continuously vibrating, as I tried and tried to decipher them. Hands would take mine, and write words or letters indiscriminately, on the bed covers with my first finger. This continued until, in very desperation I closed my eyes, feeling that I would despise writing unto the end of time, would never try to decipher any more such communications, never again permit my hand to be used for such purposes. This resentful and rebellious mood lasted until day had almost come, and as I felt it giving way opened my eyes and was almost shocked to see those vibrating, tantalizing letters in the identical position I had last seen them. I viewed them almost indifferently now, feeling that it did not matter whether they were there or not. Then in a gentle, methodical way, the vibrating letters formed themselves into this sentence, "This is thy lesson in patience. Be thou patient even unto the end." And thus another Tuesday night took its place in the file of yesterdays.